Welcome once again as we continue our way through the Gospel of John. We've reached now chapter 9. As you've been following, Jesus has been in Jerusalem for the last couple chapters. He went there for the Feast of Tabernacles. He teaches, he makes some astounding claims about himself, and we see this rising tension between he and the Jewish leaders. Climaxed at the end of chapter 8, where Jesus says, "Before Abraham was, I am," a clear claim to be divine, to be God. And the Jews understood that. They stooped down to pick up stones to stone him for the sin of blasphemy. But it says Jesus just slipped away from them and left the temple grounds. And so now we come into chapter 9, and it begins as he went along. So the assumption is that Jesus is now leaving Jerusalem, is leaving the temple for sure, but is moving away now from this dialogue that he's been having with the Jewish leaders. So anyway, let me begin reading verse 9, verse 1. We're just going to read the first 8 verses. Chapter 9 is about Jesus healing a man of blindness. And so we're going to follow it step by step. So today in the first 8 verses is just the incident itself, what actually happened. And then the rest of it is response and commentary on that event. So verse 1, chapter 9. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed, and he came home seeing. So there's the actual incident. We'll continue to work our way through this chapter and talk more and more about it. The response, his commentary on it, the basic statement, "I am the light of the world." John, that's an important concept for John. In the beginning was the Word, and it talks about being the light of life, even in chapter 1. And we read through even his letters, this concept of Jesus being light is an important theme that carries through much of his writing. And so here is the statement, "I am the light of the world." He's been talking about the darkness of the Jews, the darkness that they're in. And another comment just to make in terms of kind of background is that of all of the miracles, of all of the healing signs, the Jews believed that the healing of sight was sort of at the top of the list. That this was the most significant miracle that could be done. And that's what the Jews in that day and age believed, the ancient world believed. And so this is, in some ways, is seen so far as maybe his greatest miracle that he has done so far, that a man was blind and he receives his sight. Now, the other thing that this chapter talks about, the first couple of verses, is the relationship between suffering and sin. And there's the assumption in the ancient world, and sometimes even the assumption even today, is that suffering is caused by someone's sin. And that's the assumption. The disciples, they see a man who's blind, and they ask Jesus, they say, whose sin caused it? Was it his own sin or his parents' sin? The assumption is somebody's sin caused this suffering, caused him to be this way. Because the truth of the matter, he was blind from birth. And so, they were thinking, well, it couldn't have been his sin because he was blind from birth, so it had to be his parents. So trying to understand this relationship. And Jesus basically says, it's not caused by anybody's sin. The words he says is, neither he or his parents sinned, and obviously they are sinners. That's not the point. Jesus is trying to get at the point that his suffering was not caused by sin. Now, we live in a world with a lot of suffering, and sometimes people do bring on their own suffering because of bad choices, because of sinful responses, sinful. And you can make the ultimate point that all suffering is the result of a sinful world that we live in. God didn't create Adam with cancer. Cancer came into the world as a result of sin. And sometimes people get it who didn't willingly expose themselves to it, but they get it because we live in a sinful world. Sometimes we pay the consequences of someone else's acts, and we suffer because of it. So we live in a sinful world. And one day there will be no more sin, no more suffering. But again, the point here, he's saying, Jesus is basically saying, this guy's suffering, this guy's blindness was not because of his parents' sin, was not because of his sin. And he goes on to say, in this case, his suffering gives me the opportunity to show the glory of God, to show the power of God over all conditions, all suffering, all sin, that he can heal. Let me read exactly what he says. He says, this happened that the work of God might be displayed in his life. So in his case, his suffering was done and was for the purpose that Jesus could heal it and show who he was and show his power and show God's power over all nature, all sin, all suffering. And you can make the point that all the miracles, basically all the signs, those miracles are signs of God's power, God's control, God being over all. And this is the case too. So it's not the result of anybody's sin in this case. They didn't do something that caused it. They are suffering, and Jesus is powerful and can heal it. And so we need to continue to pray. If there are people in our lives that are going through, as I talked about cancer, or going through some sort of suffering, that God can heal the suffering. Whether he will is his will. We don't understand all his ways, do we? But that doesn't change the fact that he can, and that we should pray for that. And we should ask God to heal, to display his glory in that situation. And so again, that's the event. A man is blind. Jesus walks by him. The disciples ask him about the issue of sin and suffering. And then he heals. I am the light of the world. I bring light to the world, not just physical, but he brings spiritual light. Now, I want to read a quote that I came across from Arthur Pink, who is a commentator, and it just shows the transition from chapter 8 to chapter 9, and I just kind of I think this is a very insightful paragraph. So let me just read it to you as I close. And again, I encourage you to go back now and just read this chapter. Just read what happens. Just reflect on this truth that Jesus is the light of the world. He's the light in your world. He's the light in your circumstances. He can bring light, not only wisdom, but healing into your circumstances. But anyway, here's Arthur Pink's words. In John 8, we behold Christ as the light exposing darkness. In chapter 9, he communicates sight. In John 8, the light is despised and rejected. In John 9, he is received and worshipped. In John 8, the Jews are seen stooping down to pick up stones. In John 9, Christ is seen stooping down to make anointing clay. In John 8, Christ hides himself from the Jews. In John 9, he reveals himself to the blind beggar. In John 8, we have a company in whom the word has no place. In chapter 9 is one who responds promptly to the word, and we'll get to that as he responds and does what Jesus says. In John 8, Christ inside the temple is called a demoniac. In chapter 9, outside the temple, he is owned as Lord. And again, we will see that as we work through the chapter. The central truth of John 8 is the light testing human responsibility. In chapter 9, the central truth is God acting in sovereign grace after human responsibility has failed. So again, just this contrast, Jesus and the Jewish leaders and their response, and just what's going on, the darkness and the light that's all the way through these chapters. So God bless you.